This video accompanies the css101 demo for Web Design 1. Before we actually get started with code, one thing that would make it really helpful for you is to have the CSS versus print chart available. On Blackboard in the Web Design 1 course, go to Course Information and click on the Print versus CSS chart. On the left-hand side, you're going to see the code equivalent to what you see on the right-hand side, which is probably what you're more used to hearing in print terms. So if you wanted to change the typeface in code, that is font-family. So I highly recommend anyone that's just starting out with CSS or HTML to definitely keep this chart handy, especially whenever you're doing the first few assignments. If you want the complete reference, you can always go to w3schools.com, which the link is provided for you here. Another thing that might be helpful is the type unit converter chart. For this chart, many of you are used to working in points and maybe pixels, but mostly points. What this chart does is it gives you the equivalent unit of measurement for pixels, ems, and percent. We're mostly going to be working with ems and sometimes with percent for things like font family, because that's going to make it a more responsive web design. And what I mean by that is that your design is going to change based on your screen size, and that is what it should be doing. So both of these things might be very helpful for you to have handy whenever you're doing these coding demos and assignments for the first few weeks at least. Let's move on to demos. And for CSS 101, we can see that there's an image file provided to us and some body copy. So what I'm going to do first is start by opening Dreamweaver. And it should already be open to the Web Design 1 site. So what you want to do, and maybe yours is collapsed like this. Maybe the first thing or the last thing you were working on was an assignment. So we're going to collapse the assignment folder. And not that that's a necessary step, but it might make it a lot easier for you, so that way you don't see all of this information and you can just focus on the demo that we're going to be doing. So we're going to right click on demos, go down to new folder, and we're going to call this CSS 101. Now you need to make the rest of the folder and file structure here. So we're going to right click on CSS 101 and choose new folder, CSS. Right click on 101 again, IMG, again, and working. And we're going to go back up, right click on CSS 101, and this time we're going to choose new file, and we're going to type in index.html. Now this is what we have done and you did for your assignments last week for the HTML assignments, but now we are going to add an additional file to the CSS folder. So put your cursor on the CSS folder and right click and choose new file. Dreamweaver is going to want to start it with a .html, or I should say end it with a .html extension. We don't want that. So hit Command or Control A to select all. And then what we want in here instead is styles.css. Do not let it name it with the .html extension. If you do, you're going to have to delete that file and remake it. So we'll hit enter or return. If you ever do need to rename or to delete a file, you can right click on it and go to edit, and then those options are there for you. We're not going to open up the styles.css here. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to double click on the index.html. I'm going to make my code larger, and I'm doing this by hitting Command or Control plus. You can also do this by hitting Command or Control U and changing it under the preferences. Okay, we always want to change the title. Right now we don't have any content, so we'll just say CSS 101 demo. Now right now the index does not even know that that CSS file exists, so we have to tell them to talk to each other essentially. So after the title tag, and honestly it doesn't have to be after the title tag, it just has to be somewhere between the head tags. You want to put that link tag for the CSS. So I'm going to do left caret link, that's the element, link is the element, space href, that's the first attribute, and then you can choose browse if you want, but it is CSS and /styles.css. Space, another attribute is rel for relationship, and the relationship is that it's a style sheet. Mine's jumping down to the next line. You do not have to make yours jump down to the next line. I just don't have any more space because of how large my type is. And then space, the last attribute that we need is type equals text/CSS, and do the right caret. Link is another self-closing tag, so we do not have to put another tag here. We can just hit Command S to save. Now, whenever you link to this file, Dreamweaver is going to eventually give you the button up here to just jump to your CSS document. It's actually pretty helpful. So sometimes I just kind of click over here in the Files panel and then it will show up. And this is what we're looking for. If this does not show up, try just closing your index.html and double clicking to open it. Okay, so you never want to go in and double click this file to open it because you might move it or might put it in the wrong spot and then you have two files and you don't know which one you're editing. So stick with just opening it through here. Okay, pretty nice, right? Okay, so there are a couple of things on Blackboard that we need to grab. Okay, so there's an image file. So let's right click on this image file and let's save as, and let's put it in the Web1 folder, demos, css101, img. It's going to be a GIF, BG standing for background, img standing for image, so it's background image. And then there is a text RTF, which is rich text format, which is unformatted text. So I will save that. And this one is actually going to go, so find css101 again, this is going to go in the working folder because we're not actually going to use it. Anything that we don't use, don't end up needing on the website goes into the working folder. Okay, great. The last thing that I want to do is I want to have my index file open in a browser window so that way I can see the changes as I'm making them. So I'm going to find my Web1 folder, open it, and go inside of Demos, CSS101, and then take that index and drag it into a browser. It should be empty right now other than our title, so don't get too discouraged if there isn't anything there. And because we are thinking mobile first, anytime we do a website, we code a website, we want to keep that window as small width-wise as we can. Okay, so there should be some text in here, so you can double click on that to open it up. And we're just going to go ahead and grab this body copy. So you can click in here and hit Command or Control A, or you can just highlight it all. Now we need to copy it, so Command or Control C. We can close that. And then go between the body tags, hit enter a few times, and then paste with Command or Control V. All right. So the next thing that we need to do is put in those HTML tags. That part doesn't ever go away. All right, so this part here is probably our main heading, so I'll put an H1 tag around that. And then these are our paragraphs. You can see how some of the content is changing red at a certain point or a different color. So this is Dreamweaver's color coding system. Basically, whenever you see this text start to change a different color, you're going to notice that Dreamweaver is color coding certain things. So these will be blue, these will be white, and yes, yours might change depending on if you chose a different workspace at the beginning. But this is Dreamweaver's way of telling you if you did something wrong. So right now, what's wrong about this is that, well, one, there's no element called put, and there is no right caret anywhere. So Dreamweaver is telling you that you already have an issue because there's no right caret. All right, and then I will close that here. One other thing, because some of you are starting to get really good at formatting your text the right way. So one thing that you could do, so you notice how the H1 is tabbed in, you could highlight all of this text and then just hit tab and it will tab it in. And the point of that is to show that it's inside of this body tag. So that kind of makes it nice. All right, I'm going to save my progress so far. And this is pretty much all that we had to do. I'm going to do another HTML comment just to make sure it kind of stays fresh in your mind. So I'm going to do left caret exclamation hyphen hyphen reminder that this is an HTML comment. Right caret. Okay, so just so that way you remember how to do them. Okay, and then I'm just saving as I go with Command or Control S. Okay, do not do file save as, just do Command or Control S. Okay, now we're ready to move on to our CSS document, the document that controls the style. Typically, whenever you're coding a website, you would come in and do all the HTML first, and then you would move on and do the CSS. You don't normally jump back and forth until you have most of the website coded. Okay, so to jump over to your CSS document, you just click the button that's up here at the top. Now, a few nice things that Dreamweaver has that you can utilize. If you go up to your menu bar and choose View, and then Split, Code, it's going to show you both sets of code at once. So that's pretty nice. And then you can also choose how you want it to split. Do you want it to split horizontally or vertically? Typically in class, I just do view code because I need more space for you guys to be able to see my text, but you're more than welcome to split it so that way you don't have to jump back and forth between your document. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is I want to put a background image here, right? And even before I do that, if I wanted to put a background color, anytime you want to fill the browser window, so everywhere that it's white, you want to fill it with a color or a background image, you have two options. You can style it on the HTML tag, or you can style it on the body tag. As we get more advanced, you're going to find out ways that you can style both. But for right now, we will just stick with body. Okay, so I'm going to style body. So body is my selector. I'm going to do an open curly brace, and then Dreamweaver will automatically add the closing one. So anytime you want to fill the browser window with an image or a color, that property is going to be background hyphen, and then you tell it what you want to fill it with. So I will do, we'll just go ahead and do the image. Background hyphen image colon URL, and then you do have to browse and find where that image is. And this is another reason why you don't want to move files around after you get started. Right, and then I have a semicolon. So I will hit Command S. So remember that semicolon is needed at the end of every declaration. Okay, you have to have that there. So refresh, and oh boy, look at that. So just to give you some indication of what that image actually is, just so you can get a better understanding of what's happening. By default, whenever you put a background image in, it repeats. Okay, so that's actually what that image is. And you can see how it's repeating. Okay, so it ends like right here when it starts to kind of curve up. And whenever I made it, I just tried to make sure that it matched on both sides. Okay, so that's really what is going on there. So by default, it's repeating. If you don't want it to repeat, then you can do background hyphen repeats colon, and then you can tell, like, if you just want to show up once, then that's no repeat. Repeat is what's doing anyway. You could do repeat X, so it'll go horizontally. You could do repeat Y, and then it's just going to repeat once. That kind of looks bad. So let's change that to X. I just wanted to show you that you could do it and kind of have that as an option. I mentioned also doing background color. So you could do background hyphen color, and then you could choose color picker, or you could go and use the pure CSS hexadecimal values. So I'm just going to choose any color here. And then you'll see anywhere where the image isn't, it's going to repeat. Now that white is only there because that's part of the actual image. Okay, so again, just wanted to show that to you, but I'm going to take it off because it doesn't really look that good. Okay, So moving forward, what I'm going to do is just throw a bunch of CSS on the this element, the H1 and the paragraph tags, just so you can see that these things actually exist and how to make these changes. Okay, so let's do, actually let's throw in a CSS comment here. So I want to put in a comment saying repeats the image horizontally across the top. Okay, so this right here is what's denoting a CSS comment. The thing that's really nice about a CSS document is it has comments at the top. So that's pretty helpful. Okay, so now I want to style the H1. So I've put in the H1, which is my selector, and then I'm going to start putting in a bunch of properties and values to make up declarations. So first I want to style the typeface. Well, if you go back and you look at that chart that I gave you, you'll see typeface. To change this typeface, then it's font-family. Now you're going to see all of these different, and mine's actually kind of going off the screen because of how big I have it. You're going to see all these different fonts listed here, and there's about almost 10 that you have that you can choose from. Do not choose anything other than what's on this list. So you're only able to use what's on this list for now. I will later talk to you guys about why you can only use these fonts, but you have to stick with these for now. In short, these are the fonts that kind of come with most operating systems. And whenever you put a website online, even if you chose a font like Playfair, if someone didn't have that on their computer, then it's not going to work for them. They're not going to see that font. So you need to choose web-safe fonts, and that's what these are. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose one. And you'll notice that there's a bunch of them listed. So it says Gotham, and then a comma, Helvetica New, Helvetica Arial, and then sans serif. This is known as a font stack. Okay, this is known as a font stack. So what's going to happen is it's going to choose Gotham. If the computer that is viewing your website doesn't have Gotham, then it will do Helvetica New. If it doesn't have that, it'll do Helvetica, and then it'll do Arial. And if it can't find any of those fonts, it's just going to choose the default sans serif font. So you always have to have a font stack that ends in some font category, and you definitely want that because you want to control the design, right? So you want to make sure that you have all that. Okay, let's do font hyphen size. Let's change the size of it. So I'll do 3M. Okay, 3M, and I want to keep checking this to make sure. Look how nice and large that is. All right, so 3M, pretty big, and that M kind of goes back to this chart here, so 3M almost off the charts, 36 points. Okay, and you can go higher than 3M, like you can keep going. This is just anything larger than that, it's probably just kind of like, are you sure you want it to be that big? Because that's pretty large. Okay, what else do we want to do? Let's change the color of the font. Okay, this is a little bit different. For this font color, you might think you would do font hyphen color, but you don't. You actually just do color. All right, so let's go ahead and change that color. You can make it whatever color you want. You don't have to choose the same one that I did. Yay, it changed. Okay, moving on. Let's add space between each letter. So that is letter hyphen spacing. And this one you can put in a pixel amount. You probably don't need it to grow as you move on. Okay, and this would be the equivalent of tracking. So you added 2 pixels of space between each letter. If you want it to be underlined, you could do text decoration underline. Okay, so underline, bold, and italic you can actually do with CSS. Font style, if you want to change change it to be italic, that's what you would use. So font hyphen style and then italic. Fancy. Okay. Next, let's try text transform. Text transform is how you can change it from being uppercase, lowercase, capitalized without actually having to go into the HTML and change it. So it's pretty helpful actually. So lowercase would make it so that it's all lowercase. Capitalize will only capitalize the first letter of each word, and then uppercase is going to make it all in uppercase. So Look how nice. Like I didn't even have to go into the CS or into the HTML and it just changed it. Really helpful. You can align it. So if you want to change the alignment, that's text-align. And some of these really are just pretty self-explanatory. And so that's going to center it. One more for the H1. Let's do word spacing because we did letter spacing. So now let's do word spacing. So let's do, that's word hyphen spacing. And I want to make it pretty obvious, so I'm going to do like 10 pixels. Boom, look at that. Okay, and you could add more, but I think you get the point. Okay, so next I want to change the paragraph. Now, whenever I do this, it is going to change all paragraphs. Later on, you're going to learn how to target just one paragraph versus all of them, but right now we're going to style them all to look the same. So you're going to do P as the selector because that's what the element is, and then open your curly brace. And let's do, let's style the font family. Just because we styled it up top doesn't matter. We still want to style it here. Let me see what that one looks like. Oh, that is not a good body copy for, or a good font for body copy. Okay, I can handle that one. That one's a little bit better. Let's do font size. And let's do 1.3 M. And here's the thing. I don't expect anyone to magically know what value to put in. Just start with something. And even if you start with 1M, that at least gives you an idea of what it looks like. And then most of your body copy font, it depends on the font family. I've seen it as low as 0.7 and as high as like what we have is 1.3. So you kind of get to make that decision. Okay, now that is kind of large, but you could always come in and change it. So if I wanted 0.9, yeah, like that's a little bit easier to read. All right, let's change the color. All right, so I'll just kind of obviously not picking any pure colors here. So that changed a little bit, but you get the idea. Okay, let's also do line height. Line height, and line height is the same as leading, so let's try 1.8 M. I'll put a thing in here saying leading. Try and help you remember. It's a little bit tall, but not bad. It's not awful. Let's try, let's change the background color. Okay, let me switch this up a little bit. So I'll do background hyphen color. So this is going to fill in the paragraph so they have a block of color behind each one of them. Just like that. Right now, there isn't a way to get rid of that space. You'll find out more about that later, but right now, we're just leaving it as is. You could add a border. So if you want to add like a stroke around the outside edges of this block of text, so you could do border. Now, the border property needs to have at least 3 things in its value. You need to have a thickness, so you could choose medium, thick, thin, or you can put in a pixel amount. So I could do like 2px, space. You need to give it a color, and it doesn't matter what order these are in. And I know this is going to look hideous, but as long as you guys can see it, then that's what I'm concerned about. And then space, so just put spaces in here. And then you tell it the style. Okay, so there's all these different kinds. Solid is probably what you would kind of consider a normal border. But there's other ones that you can use as well. So let's see. Yeah, there you go. And if you want it to be thicker, so let's do 22. Whoa. Okay, so I think that gives you a good idea of just how much that can change. Okay, so just a side note, guys, before I go in it and refresh in the browser window, I am hitting Command or Control S, so you always want to keep saving. Okay, let's do Another thing that you could do if you wanted to be specific and say, oh, I only want a border on the top, then you could do that. And now there's only a border on the top. If you wanted there to be border like on the top and the bottom, then you would do another line and say border hyphen bottom. And then maybe this one is 3px, and oh dear, we're just making something not good here. And maybe this one's a dotted. Okay, so I just want to point out to you that if you want a border on specific sides, there it is, then you can call them out like that. I mentioned that you can make things bold, so that would be font hyphen weight, even though you never want to have bold body copy. We'll just do bold. Ooh, no one's going to want to read all that, but I just want you guys to have the idea. You can also indent. So if like a traditional paragraphs, like if you're writing on a typewriter, it would indent the first line of a paragraph, and then you just tell it how much you want it to indent by. So there you go, little indent. Usually it's the equivalent of 5 spaces, so I think this is pretty close to it. Okay, and then you can kind of continue going on and playing with things as you want. You'll notice that we used a lot of things that are on here. I used most of them. The only one I didn't really use, like margin and padding, we're going to talk about later. These ones we're going to talk about later, and this one. So went over border. Font variant is just how you can do small caps. Yeah, but most of these other things I believe we got. So yeah, some of them, we'll talk about them later, so you don't have to worry about some of those too much. But definitely a really handy and useful chart to have available to you. Okay, again, if you weren't able to get yours to look like this, and not that this is a work of art by any means, but if you messed up somewhere, one, check and see if like maybe you misspelled something. I've had a lot of students put in for background, they just spell it as background. And sometimes if you say it fast, you don't even notice it. So you want to go in and make sure, like, spell checking and checking for punctuation is huge with code because it is not forgiving. If you miss a semicolon, now this line is going to be wrong and this line is going to be wrong. Neither of them will work. But you'll see here, at least Dreamweaver was trying to tell you, like, hey, there's something wrong here. Now, that doesn't mean there's something wrong on this one. Usually it means look to the left of it. Now, there's nothing to the left of it here, but if you kind of keep going to the left, this is to the left of it. So that's where your problem is. So double check, maybe kind of go back through the demo, or you can always ask your instructor. But that is pretty much it for the lecture on CSS 101.